Gogan? Gogan. Hello, I'm Andrew June Donovan,
And I'm Jeffrey Donovan.
and we're coming to you from the first beautiful snowy day in Utah. Woohoo. So we wanted to make a video in light of the recent events that are happening all over social media and the news concerning the Mormon Church's new policy for when children of gay parents can receive church ordinances.
And the actions of people that choose to engage in a same marriage.
Same-sex marriage. And our intention for this video, it's not to discuss church policy or to give our opinions about the policy. The policy is what the policy is, and it's already done. So what we wanted to do was share what our emotional response was and why we have that response. We've seen a lot of people that are close to us in anger and in pain and frustration and in a state of defensiveness. When we heard this, first I thought it was a joke. And then Jeff showed me that it wasn't a joke. But emotionally, though, I felt very peaceful. And how did you feel?
I felt very peaceful as well. And there's a couple of reasons. Our intention here is to share with you a sense of responsibility for your own life and what self-actualization really means.
Maybe we could start with a little bit of our story. A few years ago, some of you have seen videos on the internet from the Far Between or the It Gets Better project. Jeff and I both were interviewed, and we were just dating back then. That was over 4 years ago. And we were talking in the video about how we attend church, how we feel totally safe in that religious environment, and how we intend to raise our children in the church. And fast forward 4 years down the road, we're in a very different space now. Yeah, I feel like if you're growing in life, you're never going to anticipate how you're going to grow, because right now we are very happily removed from the church, and we have no intentions of raising our children in the church. We don't have hard feelings about the church at all.
No bitterness or angst.
No. And in fact, the best word that I could use to describe my relationship with the church is that it's just not relevant to me. Not me, and that doesn't mean that I'm above it or that I'm better than it. It just means that it's not part of the path that I've chosen. There is no aspect of our relationship with the church, with God, that I promise you, that we have not explored already. Would you agree with that?
I would, yeah.
The 10 years ago, Andrew would have heard a response like that and said, well, that just means that you've kind of diluted your spirituality, or you've forgotten yourself, or lost your faith, or whatever it is. And the place that we're in spiritually right now is a result of a very beautiful paradigm shift that we've sought. It began about 3 years ago when we started meditating, and especially when we started learning about self-actualization. And that's a concept that I'd heard in psychology classes in high school, and I didn't really understand what it was. And to us, self-actualization now, it's a spiritual way of being. It's been the thing that's allowed us to resolve any grief, any heartache that we've experienced. It's really the reason why we don't feel any conflict or any attachment to the church anymore. The ego is the opposite of self-actualization. And in fact, even in Mormon culture, we talk about having a soul, so, a part of us that's spiritual, that's eternal. And then we have the mortal, carnal part of us that's, the physical being in this world. And it's kind of the same concept as ego versus self-actualization. So we have a higher self, an infinite self, and an egoic self. And the egoic self is where the world lives. And this is fascinating because this is what Jeffrey and I have learned. There are 6 things that define the ego. Number 1, the ego says, I am what I have, meaning my possessions. I am what I do, meaning, my job, my philanthropic endeavors, whatever activities that I do. I am what others think of me. We can all relate to that. I am separate from others, meaning that
nobody understands me or gets what I'm going through.
Or my stuff is my stuff and your stuff is your stuff, so let's worry about ourselves, kind of thing, right? Then the 5th one is I am separate from what I lack, meaning that you feel a lower sense of self-worth because you lack certain things. The last one is I am separate from God. We spent years exploring this, reading about it, journaling about it, meditating, pondering, and wow, I found nothing to refute those 6 points. That's what the ego is, and that's the non-spiritual. The opposite of those things is the higher self, the spiritual self, the part of us that is purely creative. We love the concept of the higher self because it's totally in alignment with what we perceive God to be. In the Mormon Church, the church teaches that God is the creator. I mean, most religions teach that, right? And then we say that we're children of God, and somehow we're separate from God, and we're always trying to get back to God. We're trying to bridge that gap. When we learned this idea of the ego being the part of us that says, I'm separate from God, that's when just clarity started coming. We started looking at the world around us and realizing that everything we do is a creative act. Everything that we do is an attempt to create meaning. It is impossible to argue whether or not something is meaningful.
Well, meaning is purely defined by the individual, right?
Right.
It's based on a perception. So
Right.
if my favorite color is green,
And I can argue all I want. Well, this is actually why green's not your favorite color.
I think we forget to realize that really our entire reality is subjective.
This is something that was a challenge for my mind to comprehend when we first started learning about this. So I have a little analogy. All right, so what color is your shirt? Burnt orange?
Sure, it's burnt
Ish.
orange.
It's burnt orange. Is it, like, how do you know it's burnt orange?
Yeah, well, because it looks burnt orange.
But why is it burnt orange? Is it actually, it's not burnt orange. That's a word that we've used to get a common understanding about what that is.
What this may look like.
Yeah, it's not actually burnt orange. In fact, scientifically, it's technically everything but burnt orange, and that's why we see it as burnt orange. And the point is that it's the perception.
And that's how meaning works. You can't argue somebody's meaning. Even the most cruel and vile or misunderstood acts, you can argue whether it's morally right or wrong based on your moral code or your society's moral code. Ultimately, though, you can't force onto somebody your level of meaning. That's meaning is a choice, which is liberating in that sense of agency.
Yeah, I love that meaning is a choice. And what that's meant for us is that every person's meaning in life is just as valid as what's meaningful to us. And we can never argue with that. We learned this when a friend of ours that was starting to become a life coach, he asked us, what's the purpose of life? And, our brains immediately think, well, it's to come to earth to get a body. And he said, the purpose of life is to create meaning. And I don't know about you, but I had to reflect on this for days. And I realized I couldn't find anything in my existence or my experiences that disagreed with that.
You can't refute that the purpose of life is to create meaning. You can in certain levels when you define, well, this is what's meaningful to me, and you argue, well, this is what life is really for. But if you take that a level deeper, you'll realize, well, that's what I create and that's what I strive for because that's meaningful to me. And that's it.
Yep. So to take this back to this self-actualization, the higher self versus the ego, we've talked about how the ego defines itself. The ego also wants things that are very basic and carnal. The ego wants control. The ego wants love and approval, which is a silly thing to want because love just is, right? Love is an infinitely abundant energy. The ego wants security and survival, which is a silly thing to want because nothing can damage your existence. I mean, maybe something can hurt your physical body, but your existence is safe. And the ego wants separation, meaning it wants to be different. It wants to be independent. And our emotions, we found, are one of the easiest ways to indicate whether we're coming from a spiritual place or an egoic place. Anything, if we were to make a scale, and you can, look up all kinds of emotional scales on the internet, if you have a scale that starts with depression, guilt, shame, anger, boredom, complacency, apathy, courage, selflessness, excitement, passion, love, gratitude, and enlightenment at the top.
All the way through the range.
Right? Anything that's, from that place of love and higher, that's a very spiritual thing. Love, compassion, gratitude, forgiveness, all of that. Anything that's of those lower emotions, those are the indicators that you're coming from an egoic place.
Now, an important thing to note here is that our actions can be the same again, everything's about perception, but really, if you look at the actions that a person takes, you can see it coming from all sorts of different ways. It's when you actually feel that and communicate with that other person or entity or wherever the action is coming from, that's where you feel the level of their message, whether it's or communication, whether it's coming from a space of love and service and gratitude, or if it's coming from a place of lack or fear or to protect and defend.
To control.
We've
watched, our many friends and family members respond to this message from the church. A lot of it has been from those lower emotional points. And our only interest in this is, what are you creating? What are we creating? I hear people talk about like the end of the world and all the terror and horror and things like that, and I think, well, is that what you're trying to create? If
That
so, keep focusing on
if
that.
that's true for your reality,
Uh-huh.
good for you. That's what was that phrase that we heard? Not my.
Oh, you go to your church and
Oh,
I'll go to
you
my
go to your
church.
church and I'll go to mine. In my church, we're not creating the end of the world.
Uh-huh. And we have a very dear friend, and she and I were talking about prophecies the other day, and she says, "Well, don't you believe in prophecy?" And I said, "Well, think about how does a prophecy come to pass? It comes to pass by people engaging in the actions that create the fulfillment of that prophecy. It's still created by us. And so, if you want to create end of days and world wars, then keep focusing and putting energy into that. If you want to create something else, put your energy into something that feels better." That's where our minds went when we heard this news from the church. We could get defensive and say, "Well, this is why it should be such and such," and we could try and control people's belief. We could try and control what's meaningful to people, or we could say we are all equal expressions of that same creative force that created all that is and that will continue creating all that is. And we can either resist that and fight it and try to control it, try to be independent from it, try and persuade people to our way of thinking, or we can say we honor the creative endeavors of every expression of God.
So if I could take an emotional thermometer and stick it into my Facebook feed these past couple of days, it would be really, really tragic. The energy of what's been happening on my feed, and I'm sure many others, has been really low. So my question to you, my food for thought would be our message here is what are you creating? What are you continually perpetuating?
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's a level, Andrew, where you speak with awareness, right? And you talk about something to bring awareness to it. But then you move forward and you focus on the solution, the answer, where you're going to go, where you're going to move forward next, right?
When we talk about wanting to create meaning, meaning is something that feels good, right? And every human act ever is always in the pursuit of feeling good. I mean, even when you get angry and you beat someone up, it's because some part of your brain, even if it's there's some fallacy in your logic, you perceive that you'll feel better after getting your anger out or getting revenge or whatever. Everything is an attempt to feel better. And so look at, what's going on social media and say, how is any of that going to make someone feel better? I mean, everybody believes that they're right? Or otherwise you wouldn't be putting an argument forward. So if you're a member of the church, or if you're a member, someone who feels like you're being thwarted by the church, you think you're right, and you're talking to people to try and feel better. Well, what energy are you bringing to the table? Because good feelings create good feelings, and bad feelings create bad feelings. You cannot create joy out of a want for control. You cannot create love out of a want to control people, out of a place of defensiveness. And so ask yourself, whatever God is to you, is that an energy? Is that a person? Is that a being of, defensiveness, frustration, anger, hostility? Or is that a being of gratitude, of love, of enlightenment, of compassion, of cooperation? If you're in the pursuit of a God that's, hangs out in those ugly energies that we talked about, then yeah, feed into that and talk about that. And people ask us, so do you not believe that God is a physical being? And I'd say, why do you care? Because
It's irrelevant.
God is whatever God is, independent of my beliefs. If God's a physical resurrected body, he is that, whether or not I think he is. so it's very irrelevant to us. What's relevant to us is what we're creating, because independent of whatever God is on paper, whatever you could call him, right? We're here and we're creators, and all that is for us to create meaning. So what's the best, highest quality meaning that we can create? That's what we're interested in. I guess if we offered an invitation, it would just be to be very honest with you. Monitor your emotions and find out, are you coming from a space that matches your perception of God? Are you coming from a space that matches the ego? And that's what you're creating. And we're open to questions too. For our family and friends that are watching, no, we're not members of the church, and no, we don't have any intentions of ever rejoining the church. People asked, what if, in a crazy world, what if the church said that gay couples could be sealed in the temple? And even then, our answer is we feel so much in alignment with our spiritual callings that that's just an irrelevant question. And at the same time, and even almost paradoxically, we completely respect our families'
honor and support.
Yeah, Honor and support our family's religious affiliation.
And do what is meaningful to you. That meaning, again, and perception is so particular and unique to each individual.
If what you believe serves, then that is a worthy belief to pursue. If what you believe cause you heartache and conflict, I would question those beliefs. If what you believe causes feelings that are in alignment of that God that you relate to, that sounds like a great belief to live by. So, much love. Thanks for hanging out with us for a few minutes.